Greetings and welcome. Our topic today is a question around what is the evidence that Africa now has the preconditions, not conditions, preconditions to be the next economic superpower after China. So we will go through three main facts I want us to discuss in terms of these preconditions. So after looking at the three facts, we can go into some analysis and conclusions as before. So the first fact is that there is sufficient evidence that the evolution of African society after colonization is actually on course towards economic renaissance if we gauge it against what all other societies in the past have had to go through, whether it's the French Revolution, the English Industrial Revolution, the Chinese amazing political and economic revolution. India is going through some now. And Africa has undergone a major transformation which may elude some people. There's a feeling, I know, that not much has changed, but in this segment, I go through three facts that tell us that we're on course. In the first fact, so I analyzed the evolution of African society after independence from colonial masters in phases. Each and every African country may not have done exactly the same thing, but you see these 6 phases that I'll go through quickly. First, almost without exception, starting with Ghana in 1956, and then a good number of other African countries in the early 1960s, always start with a phase of euphoria. Just gaining independence from a former colonial master is a euphoric experience. Every country goes through almost 6 to 10 years. So for the purposes of discussion, I'll just say the first decade is euphoria. Euphoria is understandable given centuries and decades of domination by a foreign culture, a foreign people. And when we expunge them politically, it's just euphoric, unstoppable. And now I won't even bother going into greater detail here because you know exactly all the feelings, all the things we did in the excitement of gaining political independence. But between 6 to 10 years, that euphoria is gone. It is now substituted by a new phase, the second phase, which I'll call disillusionment. Once again, there is no single African country which did not go through disillusionment after an initial 5, 6 to 10 years of euphoria. The disillusionment is exacerbated by the disappointment from the performance of our leaders. We originally thought it was just about getting rid of the white colonial master, then all will be good. What could go wrong once we get rid of them? So it's like going into a marriage. The young person, you're always kind of disappointed. At some point, you're disillusioned. You wonder what you got into. then the lucky ones realize, no, you don't take it personally. This is what life is about. But in our case, the disillusionment was prolonged because we kept thinking it's about the individuals that we put into power. So we have a coup, get rid of them, then our problems will disappear. So, but with coup after coup, the problem did not go away. In other countries, we had voted in the opposition, took out the original ruling party. The problem did not go away. So the period or phase of disillusionment also starts fading away after a decade or so, because we've tried everything. Now, we can't personalize it. We were not analyzing the society we took over from the colonials to be able to figure out, no, perfect society is just good management you need. That's fine. We're now beginning to realize it's much more than that. It's good to have a functional society and good management, but if the structural faults are invisible, if you think it's just substituting individuals without a new clear vision based on strategic analysis of various levels of structural transformation of society, you will still walk into economic disaster if you had the best leaders. Now Africans started debating everything. This is the third phase of realism. Realizing that it's not personal, it's not so and so. We have to analyze our society. We have to understand where we came from, where we are today, and where we are trying to get to. And lots of debates on the continent. Realism was setting in. One evident a development to show the level of realism is setting in is when the IMF and the World Bank prescribed on Africa the economic structural adjustment programs, which almost every country initially took up with enthusiasm. Maybe it's a bitter pill because it's forcing us to literally sell our state-owned enterprises, close this down, don't subsidize anything, etc., etc. It all sounded like maybe it could work. But African governments quickly realized that it's not quite the solution, because now they were able to start analyzing for ourselves what it takes to rebuild a society. Realism was back. And I could go into other sectors, health, education, and so on. So those period, the 80s into the 90s, for me was the phase of realism. By the mid-1990s, we're beginning to shift towards the next phase, which I call the decade of shared responsibility and shared accountability. And I think the watershed for me was 1994, when the Organization of African Unity passed a series of resolutions and declarations, which really started to show that there was determination amongst African leaders now to see a certain convergence around a political culture and political values. You may not have the same systems, but there was a certain basic set of values around a state machinery and its relationship to its citizens. We started also seeing convergence around economic governance. What does it take to run economic policies, fiscal policy, monetary policy, trade policies, which would not only start really growing the cake, but also maybe to start seeing closer relationships between the African countries themselves. So name it, by the late 90s, it was very, very clear that African countries were now determined to see African solutions to African problems. So it was not surprising that by the year 2000, in the year 2002, the Organization of African Unity was reconfigured into the Africa Union. Now you could see determination for greater cooperation. New constitutive act was put in place. You could see Africans were not overambitious. They were not trying to force a kind of unification by law. They were trying to push hard for just cooperation, greater cooperation in many activities, even if there are no penalties or heavy ones for not complying, because they were now trying to make sure everybody stays in and we move towards together. And I would say that triggered this phase. I would say between 2000 and 2010, you could see the benefits of greater peace and stability. The economies were beginning to pick up. Remember, this is the period where the African economies were growing fastest in the world. Although, as I've said before, it was a bit of a sort of a fluke, so to speak, because although the economies were growing fastest, it was almost entirely resource-based. We're exporting well through to other growing economies like China. We did miss the opportunity to convert the returns for the purposes of investing into serious industrial infrastructure and capacities. But it doesn't matter. The preconditions were clear. If African economies can grow without even much industrialization, just imagine we become an industrial giant. So that period to 2010, as I said, the economies did grow. So I would say the period 2010 to 2020 or so is the period of the reawakening of African consciousness. Now you could see confidence coming back. Like I say before, and I'll say it, if you look at the negatives from 1956 when Ghana became independence, if you look at negatives up to today, you might as well go home. You could say Africa will never make it. But if you look at the positives and the evolution of where we've come from, blow by blow, you'll see that the economic systems have improved, even though we still have dictators and we still have all sorts of unpalatable political activities, just like any part of the world. Maybe we are the last in cleaning them up. But if you go back to 1994, there were less than 10 former heads of states and government alive on this continent. Today, there are more than 40 who have been democratically elected into office and democratically left. But the tendency is to only focus on those who never left. But if you go through the whole continent and see how many have come and gone through a democratic process, you now begin to realize on the political side, major strides have been made. You can say the same thing about the economies and so on and so forth. But for me, when I say the reawakening of African consciousness, I'm going beyond that. I'm now talking about Africans beginning to enjoy being Africans. Africans beginning to realize that we are really simply the greatest people when we realize who we are and we start enjoying ourselves and our culture. And I would hazard the fact, even though it's based on anecdotal evidence, that come COVID-19, end of 2019, these 2 years, 2020 and 2021, is the period when African consciousness rose the fastest, because society at large, not just in Africa, society at large, the entire 8 billion people in the world were challenged, every country, by a little virus, to the extent that you now begin to examine your health systems. Now you know that health does not depend on heavy-duty pharmaceuticals that are exported to us by these Western countries. The greatest pharmacy in the world He is right next door. You walk out of your doorstep and you are walking past so many plants, and you don't even know that that's your body. That's where you originally came from, and it can heal most of the things you suffer from. We lost that knowledge. Now, COVID told us you quickly try to find it. We changed from eating healthy foods, even our starch-based diets were millets and so on, and you change to highly toxic potato, Irish potato, and all that kind of stuff, junk food. Now, people going back to it, try and get back to learn what healthy diets were that made Africans so healthy in the past. You can go on and on to religion and spirituality, our educational system, the way we dress, the way we carry ourselves, the way we bring up our children has been heavily tested over the last 2 years by COVID, and gave Africans a renewed feeling that the answers lie here in Africa for us. They're not going to be imported from elsewhere. So this completes, in my opinion, the evolution of African Renaissance, setting the preconditions. In the next session, we'll talk about the actual economic renaissance, what it means, but the preconditions have been set. The second fact I want to go through is that African society, in the way it's structured, has been heavily destabilized over the last 100 years or so. And now, once again, we're beginning to see Africans rebuilding these. And I start with the family, because the family has always been the foundation, cornerstone of African society. We used to have family systems so strong, you did not need a government social security system where you look after the aged people in old people's homes, orphanages over there, and people going to pay to collect their pension at the post office. We had social security systems which, if we had modernized, economies grow, and we maintained the capacity of families not to need government interventions, no social services department to come and collect our orphans, because you would not even know it was an orphan if you were in a true African society. The father could have been long dead, but they may not even know that the parents passed away until they are adults. They are fully integrated in the family. No destitute children, no street kids, no destitute women. That was African family. The community was equally strong. There was no need for government intervention at community level to govern ourselves, to resolve conflicts, to look after the environment. You would not cut those trees or kill animals unnecessarily. Not because they were policemen, but because you are brought up in a manner that one's conscience is one's policeman. That's the society at community level that we had created. And thirdly, therefore, social capital makes it possible for communities to self-govern, to be able to build the preconditions for economic capital. Because without social capital, capacity to govern, there's no economic capital you can build. Because you try and build something else that others don't have, they can destroy it, or they steal, or whatever happens, and there's no systems to actually regulate that. So it's that final bit is what I connect to economic renaissance, that Africans are now going through the social reconstruction of society, rebuilding family and community systems, so that the social capital provides us the preconditions for economic growth. So that's the second fact. The third fact is really around who are going to be the biggest economies in the world as preconditions for being economic giants. And if I'm sure you'll see the figures on the screen, but if you look at 1990, who are the top African countries, in terms of population, you won't find one African country. You look at to go for fast forward to 2050, you probably find a couple of countries. Maybe we'll go in greater detail in the next session, actually. You look at 2100 at the end of this century, there will be at least 5 out of 10 African countries who will be the largest country in the world. Africa will be the biggest economy without even us going into the detailed statistics, which we will do anyway in the next segment. So those are the 3 facts. And I would say that from there, we can then do a bit of analysis. What does that then mean in terms of preconditions for being the next economic superpower? Thank you. See you shortly. So welcome back to the analysis section. So for analysis around the question, do we have the preconditions in Africa for being an economic superpower? We went through the facts. So for the analysis, I chose to look at 6 of what generally accepted as the key characteristics of societies which can transform at Renaissance level, meaning all systems, from political to economic, cultural, will reform, and people are still themselves. They still enjoy their culture, but they've modernized. These 6 characteristics I would like to put on the table for discussion when we do get to Zoom sessions and other sessions, and to encourage people to also record your own feelings about some of these and send them in to us. We'd like your video recordings, doesn't matter how long or short, because we would like to really expose thinking across. The first most important characteristic of successful societies, successful civilizations, successful people, the single most important is confidence. I know people think it's expertise, is this? No, it's confidence. Once a society has confidence, once a family has confidence, once a corporation, company has confidence, once an individual has confidence, it's more than 50% of what it takes to succeed. So where does the confidence come from? And what has this got to do with Renaissance? Well, confidence starts with self-belief. Self-belief in your culture. Self-belief in those things that your society provided values and guiding principles. So strong families come from culturally strong backgrounds, because if there's no self-belief, there's hardly going to be self-reliance. If there's no self-reliance, there's no stamina. You can run long distances. But with confidence, you can gain that stamina. And when you make a mistake, when you fall, societies that have confidence make bigger mistakes than many other societies. The only difference is they cover up their mistakes. They'll get up and continue going. They may even blame the rest of the world for their problem, but they have the confidence. They will continue going. So Africa, in my opinion, especially over the last 3 to 5, 10 years, a steady growth in confidence. Africans are regaining the confidence that had been badly damaged by colonial trauma. So, as I was going through the facts, you could see, I don't want to repeat what I've said, but I want you to understand why I'm putting confidence at the top and where it comes from. The second characteristic of successful societies, people, families, is boldness, courage, So courage does not mean absence of fear, by the way. Courage is actually overcoming fear to achieve something you really want to achieve, or to face something you would otherwise not be able to face. So don't get me wrong when I talk about boldness and courage. I'm not talking about, psychotic behavior. I'm talking about being normal. You fear, you can actually understand fear. You actually know when you're facing risk, but you also know where it is worth it to overcome that fear and boldly go ahead and achieve your objective. So if a society loses its boldness, it does not even know how to take a calculated risk. When should we fast track our agrarian transformation so that we also become an industrial society? How do we transform our educational system so that it delivers what we really want? So boldness and courage reduces hesitation and procrastination. And once again, if you go back into the facts I was sharing, you could begin to see the preconditions are now there. Africans are more bold than they were before. Remember the time when even collectively Africans in the United Nations Security Council would be so scared to vote against this superpower, that superpower. You can begin, it's not completely gone, but now you can begin to see that the courage is back, it's coming back. They can sit back and decide why they politely saying to this superpower, which they could not say, oh, well, your enemy does not have to be my enemy. Why? And the other one the same. Our friends in Africa are those who focus on us as Africans, as people, not on our resources. So, yeah, we don't have to adopt other people's enemies. We will create our own friends and enemies. So, boldness is number 2 in my books of the characteristics that lead to successful society. Number 3 is savings and investment, which is an area where Africa has been the weakest for a long time, especially having adopted economies which we could not convert for mass structural transformation, for mass industrialization. What used to be pretty strong in African society was frugality, saving, investment. Children were the center of every family. It was not the father or the mother. It was the children. That was the center of the household. Adults came second. When you greet, when you ask each other what's going on, the first thing you ask are the children. How are the children? Not how is the grandmother. Okay. So savings and investments in a modernizing society is now what we ought to be looking at. Saving and investment in a modernizing economy can only be a result of an economy that's not only growing, but also industrializing and manufacturing, adding value. And we are beginning to see, especially with the younger generation, the desire to break through the traditional, just artisanal ways of doing business and trying to integrate those who are left out of the economy so that they're capable also to produce, sell, save, borrow, invest for bigger growth. So savings and investments is what allowed most of my generation went through this Western style education, through unbelievable savings by our parents. I remember back in the 1980s, we were doing some back of the envelope calculations, how much it cost then to have a child start primary school education up to completion of a university degree, when we calculated the costs vis-a-vis the income levels of poor rural people at that time, each African child who ends up with a university degree was equivalent to at least 100 years of income by one poor parent. That's how much saving and investment African families used to be able to go through. So now in modern times, as we economize, it's number 3 in my books, and it has to be one that we spend more time looking at. Number 4 is ambition. And by ambition, I don't mean idle dreaming of just wanting. I'm actually talking about capacity at societal level, capacity of a whole society to understand and set high standards for ourselves, being able to set high targets. We want to achieve this as society. And at one point, as I was talking to a Japanese professor and saying, we want to build a bullet train. We want to be the first people to build it. You set your standard and you put in place what it takes to eventually build a bullet train. Think big, but then think positive and put in place the processes that lead to attaining those targets. When you miss the targets, you more likely know why you missed the targets, because if you can't measure it, you are not likely to achieve it anyway. So this is ambition. Is no longer for us just idle. We want political independence. We want economic independence. Now we're talking about setting targets for ourselves. Like we have seen in Africa Union is setting targets for Africa. The Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program, CAADP, set targets. By 2025, we want to be self-reliant in food at this level. We would like to reduce levels of poverty by such and such a percentage by being able to stimulate this kind of economic inclusion, etc. Number 5 for me is capacity to learn fast. Now, I must admit that the younger and younger generation of Africans are amazing. My generation, like every generation, we thought we were the best. But if you look at the younger generation, they are bringing back this characteristic of successful society. They learn so fast. They don't, like us, wait to go to school, go to university, and then find years later you learn the wrong thing. They're learning fast by doing. So just imagine 10 years from today, when Africa is the largest population in the world and the youngest, most agile, brilliant. Think of any field, architecture, fashion design, gaming. They're going to be producing the best products in the world. By far, the Chinese will just copy paste, they change a little bit. Africans will be creating incredible products because the learning fast element is coming with the younger generations. It comes through challenging oneself, societies that challenge ourselves. We are shedding off this colonial idea that you don't challenge anything. What you're taught in school is what you do. There's only one way of doing something and the rest is incorrect. You don't have fun if you're having fun, therefore you must be doing something wrong, which is what was brought by ridiculous religions that we got from over there. Learning fast requires people with open minds, not stuck in one place by education and religions which are too out of date. So that capacity to challenge ourselves at societal level, learn fast, have fun, have a society that is truly African. That's definitely already happening. Then finally, let's just put it this way. Although it's not always a kind of nice thing to talk about in terms of characteristics of successful societies, but I tell you, If you look at all the superpowers, from the former colonial masters to current superpowers, it may not be palatable, but you know, their level of ruthlessness and callousness always comes through when you test them. They're all kind of civilized, but capacity to defend oneself, capacity to just do what you have to do to achieve what you have to do is something they have applied. So we as Africans, we have to think about that one deeply to see what it means for us. And I know we'll come up with even better solutions. So in terms of analysis, I'll leave it at that, and then we can see what you think and send us your views, questions, but more importantly, send us your video clips because we want to show the world what you think about what we're talking about. Thank you. See you in the final segment. So in conclusion, I hope I've provided you sufficient evidence and analysis to convince you that the preconditions, once again, I'm not saying the conditions, the preconditions that Africa could be, will be, can be an economic superpower in after China are all there. The preconditions are here. I hope I have convinced you that the negative perception that Africa may not have moved towards a kind of Renaissance type evolutionary activities is entirely wrong. If you look at what we've gone through since 1960s, euphoria in the 60s could have given us years later, decades later, the false impression that we failed and we're just trying to catch up with what we failed with initially. But the reawakening of African consciousness is a way of forgiving ourselves, knowing that we didn't know what it is that we were looking at in terms of what it takes to really recreate a society, which remains truly African. In other words, putting it crudely, if we just succeeded so easily in 1960 in what we were running, what that would have meant is we would have just succeeded trying to be Europeans, would have just succeeded in trying and continuing with copying and pasting what the Europeans had put in place for us. But rather, what has happened is we tried hard to keep as much as possible that was working for us. So we didn't abandon completely the Western systems. We simply slowly dropped the ones that clearly had to be dropped, up to a point where we started seeing a resurgence of stability, a resurgence of peace on the continent, a resurgence of economies that actually can perform at high level, a resurgence of capacity of Africans to govern ourselves, a resurgence of capacity of Africans to unite again, albeit initially through greater cooperation rather than forced integration. So I would say that all this, to me, and I'm challenging you and all historians, analysts, to prove me wrong if you can, and show me one great society, whether it's French, British, United States, Japan, China, which did not go through these kinds of phases of societal transformation, from serious collapse of societal systems, civil war, inability to really keep together a society. That same society, whether China, this adds to the conclusion I always say, under this theme. Whoever controls Africa's resources runs the world. It means, therefore, that in Africa, which starts controlling its own resources, in Africa, which starts actually manufacturing and consuming mass production of the raw materials, mass processing of these, and mass consumption of these for ourselves, before we even talk about the rest, is how our economies are going to grow into the biggest in the world. So if that's the case, then it follows that is the level of consciousness that remains. It goes back to us as Africans understanding how other societies, how we even in the past, before we even talk about other societies, we as Africans, at our height of greatness, was these same qualities of high levels of self-reliance and self-confidence, strong family and community systems, capacity to set ourselves lofty targets and achieving them, boldness to overcome fear where we believe it is important to achieve certain goals, learning fast and not waiting there for somebody to come and rescue one, learning pretty fast and doing whatever it takes to succeed. So that's my conclusion for today. And in the next session, we will go deeper into, therefore, what will an economic renaissance for Africa actually look like, and maybe even run some scenarios around that. See you then. Thank you very much.